What's up, poopers? The previous video hit 1,000 likes, so it looks like you guys really want to hear more about melee cleave dungeon leveling. So that's what we're going to talk about in this video, and this will be a two-part series. In this first part, we'll talk about the group composition and strategy and why you should dungeon level as a melee cleave, and in the second part, we'll go into detail about the leveling path. Now for this video, we're going to break it down into three parts: why you should dungeon grind, who should dungeon grind, and how to dungeon grind. And I'll have a recording of a Deadmines practice run going in the background as I talk that was recorded at level 20 with a 3 warrior, 1 paladin, 1 priest group composition. We'll start with the why you should dungeon grind, because a couple of you guys were not so convinced it's a good option from the last video. So first, let's talk experience numbers. When you kill a level 20 normal monster, it grants 145 experience. That is 100% of its normal experience or its base experience value. When you kill a level 20 elite monster, it will grant 290 experience, and that is 200% of its base experience value. And when you kill a level 20 elite monster in a dungeon, it should grant you 250% of its experience value, 362. This exact number is hard to show because repacks and private servers don't have this bonus in dungeon elites. But this can easily be confirmed if you look at any streamer VODs of them killing elites inside dungeons versus outside of dungeons in classic beta to see an XP discrepancy, and this lines up with old vanilla documentation. 250 seems to be the correct modifier. This is one of the reasons this method of leveling was not so good on private servers, and thus many people just write it off, but it appears to be much more efficient on the classic beta. Now let's talk group experience. When you kill a normal monster in a 5-man party, it grants 40 experience at level 20, 140% of its XP value divided by 5. When you kill an elite monster outside of a dungeon, it grants 200% of its base value experience, then 140% of that experience value from the party modifier divided by 5, so 81 experience. And then inside a dungeon, it's 250% of its base experience value, then 140% on top of that value from the party modifier divided by 5, so 101. So what this means is that killing 3 elites inside a dungeon with a 5-man group is roughly equal to killing 2 normal mobs by yourself. Now that we have these numbers, we can make a more clear visual comparison. So let's watch my 5-man Deadmines run versus a clip from my solo leveling guide where I hit 60 in 5 days at roughly the same level, around level 20. Keep in mind that the solo leveler does have the Deadmines gear, whereas the group levelers do not. Once you take downtime into account, it's pretty clear that the experience difference from group grinding is faster, but anyone who has leveled a melee class in Classic knows that I tilted this comparison heavily in the favor of the solo leveler, because it's at level 20 just after I had gotten Smite's Hammer and the Chauces of Westfall. The bigger discrepancy between solo and dungeon leveling comes when the gear that you are using becomes less relevant, as you outlevel it. There are periods of droughts for certain classes where there are little to no upgrades to obtain, but dungeon grinding groups have their gear constantly up to date. We cannot just compare kill speeds though, we also need to look at questing. Quests give a lot of experience, but they're a finite resource that usually involve travel, so the best way to calculate questing versus grinding is to just look at experience gained per hour. In my 5-day warrior leveling run, my experience per hour from levels 20 to 21 was 21,500. From 21 to 22, my XP per hour was 23,000, and from 22 to 23, it was 21,000. This was using a very efficient leveling route through Darkshore and Redridge, a questing path very similar to Joanna's leveling guide, and keep in mind 20 to 21 was when I turned in Deadmines quests, so these are included with these calculations. Simply comparing that to the XP per hour we were getting in dungeons with corrected classic beta XP values, we gained 11,500 experience in 26 minutes, giving a minute to reset the dungeon, that has dungeon grinding in the upper 27,000 experience per hour. And that is not including speed increases we get from gear or the quest turn-ins, and this is at level 20 before warriors are getting their whirlwind and sweeping strikes and big hitting AoE abilities. Another thing to keep in mind about questing though is that quest hubs come in spikes, and a dungeon grind group doesn't mean you have to skip all of the high experience per hour quest hubs. An efficient dungeon leveling group would do easy and fast quest hubs while traveling between dungeons to get the benefit of high experience quest hubs on top of the dungeon grinding. The only thing to be wary of though in a 5-man party is loot based quests. For example, a group of 5 people making their way to the Scarlet Monastery at level 30, they can stop at the Thandal Span and do 3 kill based quests, some of which that have follow-ups, and grab the letter quest from Sully Blue in the water. Then head to Refuge Point and turn in Plea to the Alliance and take the Northfold Manor quest. Complete it in a 5-man group in maybe 2 minutes as you run towards South Shore to get the flight path. In South Shore, you can grab the 3 quests for Alterac Mountains and then complete the quests in Alterac while you are running in the direction of Scarlet Monastery and get the Foreboding and Encrypted Letter Plans quests at the same time. When you arrive in Scarlet Monastery, you can grind there until level 36 up to the library and complete Mythology of the Titans. Then the whole group can hearth back to Ironforge to train Whirlwind and clear your bags, and you have upwards of 7 to 8 quests you can turn in as you head back to SM in Arathi and South Shore. Just free chunks of experience that took very little effort to get in between the highly efficient dungeon grinding. When we calculate the experience hour difference obtained in the 20s in the dungeon grinding, and then calculate the experience difference in the 30s to 40s based off of Monkey News' VODs, which are gone now because I failed to get them and he doesn't save them that long, the projected leveling speed is roughly 20 to 30% faster. So a 5-man leveling group can expect to hit 60 in roughly 4 days played, and that's an estimate on the slower side. So now that we know melee cleave is really fast for warriors, let's jump into the who should dungeon grind and about forming up the group and choosing your party members and who benefits from being in a melee cleave group. Looking at hunters and mages first, they will not benefit much from joining a melee cleave group. While hunters have great synergy with melee cleave, they can still level faster on their own with an efficient leveling path because they do not need gear upgrades and they have aspect of the cheetah to move fast in the open world. In addition, they use mana and have to stop to drink while they are AoEing, whereas melee cleave group is all about never stopping. This is fundamental to the playstyle of warriors and the group's kill speed. Mages, while they have great AoE, they run out of mana and often pull aggro off of the warrior and melee, reducing the rage they get and splitting up the enemies. Mages can level extremely fast AoE grinding in the open world, or are better off in a spell cleave dungeon group. Next are the iffy classes, Druids and Warlocks. Druids synergize really well with the melee cleave group. They have a lot of buffs in the form of Thorns, Mark of the Wild, Aspect of the Pack at 40, and Fairy Fire and Feral form. Feral DPS isn't really high though, and Druids can level fairly fast on their own on a solo questing route. Similarly, Warlocks can do great AoE in a spell cleave group. They can also level pretty fast by themselves. They fit nicely in a group with a healer though, because they can life tap to keep up with the melee, and they have several talents that help them stay in combat without having to stop and drink. They also provide health stones and other abilities that benefit the group greatly. Warlocks basically just fit anywhere. Then the Yuppers. These people definitely want to melee cleave grind if they can. Priests can level fine on their own. They won't struggle, they just aren't particularly fast, and their wand affects their leveling speed. They can benefit from having constant wand upgrades in the dungeons. Warriors, Paladins, Rogues, and Shaman all level fairly slow because they're face tanking mobs up to 60. Their gear constantly matters and they all benefit from being in a group and getting healed while they dish out their damage. They will all level much faster if they are able to get in a melee cleave group than they would if they followed a solo questing route. So let's go more in depth about what each of these classes brings to the table and what you need when you are forming your dungeon cleave group. Starting with healers. For a healer, priest is what a melee cleave wants. I've seen quite a few arguments come up for using a shaman or a paladin or a druid. They would all definitely add some nice buffs to a pure DPS group of warriors, for example, sure, But the benefits of a priest lie in two specific talents: meditation and spirit tap. Keeping spirit tap up constantly in a melee cleave group is pretty easy. The priest simply marks a target and the melee cleave let the priest finish it off with wanding. This means the priest constantly has 65% mana regeneration in combat and double spirit. If you combine this with my required support class of a shaman or a paladin with wisdom or mana totems, priests are essentially the only healers that can handle zero downtime groups. A priest allows the warriors to continuously pull and stay in combat to keep cleaving and building up rage. That is why I prioritize them over the other healers, which require to drop combat and drink often. Priests can also add to damage through Shadow Word Pain and Wanding, and later on their heal crits also buff armor. Next, the tank, a warrior, is the key for the group. Warriors deal damage the more they can get hit. They are able to deal the heaviest cleave damage of any melee and can hold threat decently well for the group. While one warrior is required to make a melee cleave group work, as many warriors as you can get in the group is recommended. They benefit so much from grouping up for dungeons, so you shouldn't have a hard time finding any. For paladins and shaman, they serve as buff bots. They don't necessarily deal high damage, but they add very powerful buffs through totems and blessings. They hit decently enough and serve as nice backup healers if the priest gets in trouble. Wind Fury and Strength of Earth are amazing, with Magma Totem to help AoE. Paladins have auras and Consecrate and Might early on, then they can swap to Kings when everybody gets more stats. They just fit perfectly. It's great to have one in the group. The last two spots though are really up in the air. You can take whatever class you want left from the list. While having 3 warriors means very fast clear times, keep in mind the other utility and other synergies you can get from other classes. An extra warrior could spec into improved battle shout and improved demo shout. Rogues can bring CC and poisons to the table and high single target DPS. A second ret for another blessing and aura isn't that bad, more shaman totems, more druid buffs, etc. Ultimately, the hardest thing here is to just find a full group of people that can play together. Lastly, we will talk about how to dungeon grind, clearing the dungeons. Now, I briefly touched on it already, but essentially a melee cleave group wants to constantly be fighting in the dungeon, juggling threat and allowing the priest to last hit to keep spirit tap up. Early on, it's likely that the priest will still need to stop and drink, but once they start getting more spirit gear, you can really start pushing the limits on how many mobs the warriors can pull. Pre-level 20, warriors have to rely on Rend and Thunderclap for AoE, but it is still a little bit viable. At 20, the AoE from Paladins and Warriors kicks in with Cleave, and at 30, the big AoE kicks in with Blade Flurry and Sweeping Strikes. The more mobs hitting the Warriors, the more often they can cleave, with parry talents buffing their swing speed as well. It's important to know your limits and communicate with your healer the entire time. To really push the limit and go as fast as possible, you should also be utilizing Retaliate to its full potential, pulling a lot of mobs whenever it's up and letting the warrior with Retaliate up face tank and get as much done with it as possible. You'll need to do some dungeon practice and be good at your class if you want to try to pull this off. If you haven't played the game in 15 years, you will struggle. But compared to a spell cleave group where there's a lot of margin for error in the pulls, as long as you coordinate as a melee cleave group with your priest with spirit tap and avoid needless damage, melee cleave is pretty face roll, it's pretty relaxing. But that's about it about how to dungeon grind. As for the exact path I will be taking and you should take to get to 60, including the quests in between the dungeons, we will be covering that in part 2, as well as some tips on how to handle each of the dungeons. I'll let the rest of this video run for those of you interested in seeing how we handled the dead mines. Note that this is recorded on a repack where we modified the damage, HP, and armor values to reflect classic beta, but the experience values you are seeing are still lower than they should be. And this was a dry run, so no adjustments or plans were made by us yet to maximize our time. And we die on VC just because we were trying to zerg him down. We don't actually suck, that was something we were just testing. Spoiler alert, zerging him down doesn't work that well. Let me know if there's anything else you'd like me to cover in regards to this topic. Otherwise, I will try to get part 2 up within a week. Until then, I am booping out.